The wreckage burned cold in the void. Commander Vorgul of the Vorthak Dominion watched through the fractured viewport as the last of his warship's silver, purple energy cores flickered and died. The Stormclaw had been a fortress of brutal efficiency, a blade of dark steel and violet plasma, honed for conquest. Now, it was a corpse adrift in the black. His secondary heart pulsed erratically, the biofeedback from his neural implants, a constant, throbbing reminder of his failure. The ambush had been flawless. The human fleet had struck like a pack of predators, their vessels ugly, asymmetrical things, moving with a coordination that defied Vorthak tactical doctrine. They had no elegance, no adherence to the sacred geometries of war, just raw, relentless efficiency. And now, the Stormclaw was dead. Vorgul's claws flexed against the command console, the metal groaning under his grip. His crew was gone, his honor shattered. Only one escape pod remained, and inside it, the last flicker of his legacy. His offspring, the child, was small, too small, its carapace still soft, its spines not yet hardened into the proud crest of a warrior. It should have been safe in the birthing chambers of the Dominion's home fleet, but war cared nothing for tradition. A proximity alert chimed weakly in the ruined bridge. Vorgul's crest flattened in instinctive dread. Something was approaching. The sensors, crippled as they were, painted a fractured image, a human dropship, angular and utilitarian, its hull scorched from battle. It moved with eerie silence, gliding through the debris field like a scavenger drawn to carrion. Vorgul bared his fangs. He would not die begging. The human vessel did not fire. It slowed, hovered, extended a docking umbilical. Vorgul's secondary heart stuttered. This was not the way of war. The humans were supposed to be beasts, creatures of unchecked fury. They did not hesitate. They did not offer. Yet here they were, and as the airlock hissed open, revealing the silhouette of a lone human soldier, armor battered, visor reflecting the dim violet glow of dying Vorthak systems, Vorgul felt something alien coil in his gut, because mercy, he realized, was far more terrifying than cruelty. The human stood motionless in the ruined airlock, silhouetted against the flickering emergency lights of the Vorlash dying corridors. Its armor, scorched black and streaked with coolant burns, bore no insignia, no markings of rank or allegiance, only the dull gleam of reinforced plating, the faint hum of active shielding. Vorgul's claws flexed against the deck. His instincts screamed at him to attack, to tear into this invader before it could strike first. But something held him back. The human wasn't holding a weapon. He stood with his hands open, palms forward, a gesture of peace or deception. Behind Vorgul, the wounded groaned. A youngling, barely past her first molt, whimpered as her mother tried to staunch the bleeding from a ruptured artery. The scent of iron-rich blood thickened the air. The human's helmet tilted slightly. Then, without a word, he moved. Vorgul tensed, but the human didn't advance toward him. Instead, he knelt beside the wounded Vorthak female, his movements deliberate, unhurried. From a compartment on his thigh, he withdrew a slim device, a med scanner. Human tech. Gromnock, the scientist, hissed in disbelief. "They don't help," he whispered. "Predators don't." The human ignored him, the scanner whirred, casting a pale blue light over the female's injuries. Then, with unsettling efficiency, he injected a hypospray into her neck. Within seconds, the bleeding slowed. The youngling's panicked chirp softened into confusion. Vorgul's spines bristled. This was wrong. The humans were supposed to be relentless, a storm of teeth and fire. They didn't stop. They didn't heal. Yet here was this soldier kneeling in the wreckage of a ship he had helped destroy, saving lives instead of ending them. The human turned his helmet toward Vorgul. The visor was opaque, revealing nothing of the face beneath. But when he spoke, his voice was calm, measured. "The first rule of prey," he said, "is to run. The first rule of predators is to chase." A pause, The hum of failing systems filled the silence. But the first rule of soldiers? He stood, wiping coagulated blood from his gauntlet, is to protect. Vorgul's secondary heart clenched. This wasn't mercy, it was something far worse. A reminder that the humans had never been the monsters the galaxy assumed. They had simply been waiting to prove it. The human did not stay. He left the medkit behind, its contents half depleted, and vanished into the wreckage before Vorgul could speak. The only evidence he had ever been there was the steady, rhythmic beeping of the bio monitor now attached to the youngling's wrist. Vorgul stared at the retreating silhouette, his neural spines flickering in agitation. The soldier moved like a shadow, fluid, silent, utterly at home in the carnage. The Vorthak had trained their warriors to dominate battlefields through sheer brutality. But this human, he owned the dark. A low groan of bending metal shuddered through the corridor. The ship was dying. Gromnok, the scientist, finally stirred, his violet ocular membranes dilating as he processed the scene. His claws twitched toward the medkit, then hesitated. "They left us supplies," he rasped, disbelief threading his voice. Vorgul's mandibles tightened. Supplies, not sabotage, not poison. Aid. It made no tactical sense. A distant explosion rocked the hull, and the emergency luminescence flickered, plunging them into near darkness. The only light came from the human's abandoned medkit, its soft blue glow pulsing like a heartbeat. Gromnok exhaled sharply. "They're hunting the others." Vorgul's blood ran cold. He had seen the human warships descend upon the Vorthak fleet, not with the disciplined formations of the Galactic Union, but with the terrifying precision of apex predators. They didn't just attack, they isolated. They cut comms, disabled engines, and then waited. And now, one of them had stepped out of the slaughter to save a child. The answer came, not in words, but in the distant, echoing crack of a railgun discharge. A scream followed, brief, cut short. Vorgul's secondary heart pounded. The humans weren't just soldiers, they were judges, and the Vorthak had been found wanting. The silence that followed the railgun's echo was worse than the scream. Vorgul's claws flexed against the deck, his neural interface pulsing with threat assessments that spiraled into useless static. The human Major Rebecca Coombs, her insignia declared, had not returned. She had left them here, in the wreckage of their own ship, with nothing but a medkit and a single, impossible truth. They could have killed us. They chose not to. Gromnok's breath came in ragged bursts, his frilled vents flaring as he stared at the medkit's glow. His scientific mind, trained to dissect the universe into logic and equations, had no framework for this. Mercy was a weakness in Vorthak doctrine, a flaw to be excised. Yet here it lay, glowing between them like a live grenade with its pin pulled. Another explosion shuddered through the hull, closer this time. The humans were advancing. Vorgul's secondary heart hammered against his ribs. He had fought in a dozen campaigns, faced the crystalline horrors of the Zenthis swarm and the plasma, wielding fanatics of the Keldar hegemony. But this was different. The humans moved like a single organism, their attacks synchronized, not by comm links, but by something deeper. Instinct, a memory surfaced, one he had buried under decades of military conditioning. His first hunt as a youngling, tracking a Kesser pack through the acid marshes of Vorth. The predators had herded their prey not through superior strength, but through understanding. They anticipated every panic turn, every desperate feint, because they had once been prey themselves. Just like the humans, Gromnok's voice was a whisper. "They're not just hunting us, they're hurting us." The realization struck like a plasma round. The disabled engines, the severed comms, the way the human ships had let the Vorthak distress signals bleed into the void, a siren song for reinforcements. "They want more of us to come." Vorgul's blood chilled. This wasn't a battle, it was a demonstration. Outside, the corridor lit up with muzzle flashes. Shadows moved, too fast, too fluid, and then the screams began. Not the guttural cries of warriors, but the high, panicked shrieks of soldiers realizing, too late, that they were no longer the hunters. The human voice that cut through the chaos was calm, almost gentle. "Captain McKay, flank secured." A pause. Then, softer, "Yeah, found the kid." Vorgul's claws dug into his palms. The monsters who had torn through his fleet like paper had a word for their young, and that changed everything. The Vorthak warship Silent Talon drifted in the void, its silver-purple hull flickering with dying energy discharges. The humans had crippled it with surgical precision, not enough to destroy, just enough to render it helpless. A lure, a bait for the rest of the fleet. Vorgul crouched in the ruined command nexus, his armored plates scraping against the fractured deck. The air stank of ionized metal and spilled coolant, the scent of defeat. His secondary heart pounded in sync with the distant thud of human boots moving through the corridors. They weren't running, they weren't even hurrying. They walked like they owned the ship. Gromnock huddled beside him, his neural tendrils twitching with suppressed terror. The scientist had never seen battle before today. Now, his claws trembled around a scavenged sidearm, its violet charge flickering weakly. Useless, a burst of static hissed from the ruined comms. Then, voices, human voices. "Clear Sector 7-2, hostiles down." Kopi moving to engineering. Vorgul's crest flared in fury. They spoke so casually, as if this were a training exercise. As if his warriors were nothing more than targets to be checked off a list. Then, another sound. His head snapped toward the sound. There, half hidden beneath a collapsed bulkhead, was a small, armored form, a juvenile, one of the ship's brood. Guardians must have brought their offspring aboard, a privilege of high-ranking officers. The kit's violet eyes were wide with terror, its plating still soft at the joints. Gromnock made a choked noise. "Commander," Vorgul snarled, cutting him off. He knew what the scientist was thinking. The humans had found their young before. They had spoken of them. And then the footsteps stopped just outside the door. The humans didn't kick it in. They didn't blast it open. The door simply hissed apart, as if they had sliced through the locks like wet paper. 3 figures stood in the threshold. The one in front was tall, her armor matte black, unadorned. No rank insignia, no clan markings, just the faint glow of a targeting reticle across her visor. She didn't raise her weapon. Behind her, another human, smaller, bulkier, held something in his arms. The juvenile, the kit wasn't struggling, wasn't screaming. It was curled against the human's chest, its tiny claws gripping the edge of his armor like a lifeline. Vorgul's blood turned to ice. The lead human tilted her head. "Major Coombs," she said. Her voice filtered through the helmet, but unmistakably calm. "You're Vorgul, yes." He didn't answer. His claws flexed, ready to lunge, to die fighting. Then the human holding the juvenile did something impossible. He lowered the kit to the ground. The little Vorthak stumbled, then bolted toward Gromnock, who caught it with a stunned hiss. The human didn't move to stop it, didn't even tense. Major Coombs watched, her visor unreadable. "Your ship's life support is failing," she said, as casually as if discussing the weather. "Well, escort you to the escape pods." Gromnock made a noise like a dying engine. You're letting us go?" The human didn't answer. She didn't have to, because in that moment, Vorgul understood the true horror of humanity. They didn't just destroy, they chose when not to. The escape pod hissed open, its silver, purple interior bathed in the dim glow of emergency lighting. Vorgul stood frozen in the threshold, his claws digging into the alloy frame. Behind him, Gromnock clutched the juvenile to his chest, the kit's tiny breaths rapid and shallow against his armored plating. The humans had escorted them in silence. No restraints, no weapons raised. just the steady, rhythmic thud of their armored boots against the deck, a sound that should have been a death march. They were alive. Vorgul's secondary heart pounded in his throat. This was wrong. A trick, a trap. The galactic consensus had taught them that humans were predators, relentless and unyielding. They did not spare. They did not release. The lead human, Coombs, stepped back, her visor reflecting the flickering violet emergency lights. "Pods are prepped for launch," she said, her voice devoid of triumph. "Just fact. You've got about 6 minutes before your core breaches." Gromnock's spines flared. Why? The word tore from him, raw and ragged. Why not just kill us? For a long moment, the human didn't answer. Then, slowly she reached up and unsealed her helmet. Vorgul's breath caught. Her face was unremarkable, pale skin, dark eyes, a scar cutting across her brow. Not the face of a monster, not the face of a conqueror, just, she exhaled, her breath fogging in the cold air. "Because we're not you," she said simply. Then she turned and walked away, her squad falling in behind her without a word. The pod doors sealed with a final, hollow clunk. Gromnock's grip on the juvenile tightened. "This is a trick," he hissed. "They'll gun us down the moment we launch." Vorgul didn't answer. His gaze was locked on the external feed, where the humans were already vanishing into the skeletal remains of the Vorlash. No hesitation, no backward glance. They weren't staying to watch. They weren't waiting. A tremor ran through the deck, the first warning tremors of the dying ship. The pod systems flared to life, thrusters humming as they prepared for emergency separation. Vorgul's claws flexed. He had seen humans fight, had seen them tear through battalions with terrifying efficiency. But this was something else. This was choice, and that was the most terrifying thing of all. The pod launched with a shudder, hurling them into the void. Behind them, the Vorlash groaned, its silver-purple hull buckling as the reactor finally gave way. A silent explosion ripped through it, casting jagged shadows across the stars. Gromnock let out a shuddering breath. "They let us go," he whispered, as if saying it louder would make it untrue. Vorgul stared at the wreckage. They hadn't let them go. They had saved them, and that changed everything. The escape pod tumbled through the void, its stabilizers struggling against the shockwave that had hurled them from the dying Vorlash. Inside, the air was thick with the acrid scent of scorched metal and the sharp, coppery tang of fear. Vorgul's claws dug into the console, his muscles coiled tight as the pod systems flickered, struggling to compensate. Outside, the wreckage of the Vorlash twisted in slow motion, its once imposing silver, purple hull now a shattered carcass, bleeding violet plasma into the vacuum. The humans had not just destroyed it, they had unmade it. The precision of the strike was surgical, deliberate. A message, Gromnock's voice was barely audible over the hum of failing life support. "They could have killed us." His crest of spines, usually rigid with pride, lay flat against his skull. They had us in their sights. Why didn't they fire? Vorgul didn't answer. His gaze remained locked on the debris field, where the last embers of his warship flickered out. He had seen the human vessel, indomitable. They called it, looming in the darkness, its brutal silhouette bristling with weapons that defied reason. But it hadn't fired on the pod. That was the part that gnawed at him. Not mercy, not weakness. A shudder ran through the pod as its thrusters finally stabilized, orienting them toward the nearest Vorthak outpost. The automated distress beacon pulsed, a silent scream into the void. Help would come. Eventually, Gromnock exhaled sharply, his claws tapping a nervous rhythm against his thigh. "Do you think they knew?" Vorgul's mandibles tightened. "Knew what? That we were evacuating?" A long silence stretched between them. The humans had scanned the Vorlash before the final strike. They would have seen the escape pods powering up, the crew scrambling for survival. And yet, the pod's comm system crackled to life. A voice human but filtered through a translator, filled the cramped space. Vorthak vessel. This is Major Rebecca Coombs of the Terran Defense Fleet. You are not our enemy. Stand down, and you will not be harmed. Gromnak flinched as if struck. Vorgul's spines flared in instinctive aggression, but his mind raced. The transmission wasn't a taunt. It wasn't a trick. It was an offer. The pod's sensors pinged. A new contact. Not another warship, a smaller craft, sleek and fast. Its hull marked with the Terran sigil. It moved with purpose, closing the distance. Gromnak's breath hitched. They're boarding us. Vorgul's claws flexed. He had no weapons, no defenses. If the humans wanted them dead, they would be. But the craft didn't fire. Instead, it matched their trajectory, its airlock extending toward theirs with mechanical precision. A request, not a demand. The comm crackled again. You're leaking oxygen. We can help. Gromnak looked at Vorgul, his eyes wide with something the commander had never seen in a Vorthak before. Vorgul exhaled slowly, his grip on the console loosening. This wasn't surrender. This was something far more dangerous. This was trust, and as the airlock sealed with a hiss, he realized the humans hadn't just spared them. They had changed the game. The airlock hissed open, revealing the human vessel beyond. A corridor bathed in stark white light, sterile and utilitarian, yet somehow softer than the brutalist architecture of Vorthak design. The air smelled of ozone and something else, something organic life. Not the metallic tang of recycled ship air, but the faint musk of living beings. Vorgul hesitated at the threshold, his instincts screaming at him to retreat. This was enemy territory. Every muscle in his body tensed, his claws flexing involuntarily. But then he saw them. Two humans stood waiting. The first was a female, Major Rebecca Coombs, if the insignia on her uniform was correct. She was tall for a human, though still dwarfed by Vorgul's bulk. Her dark hair was pulled back in a tight knot, her face unreadable, but her posture was relaxed, open, not the stance of a predator waiting to strike, but of someone who had already made their decision. The second was male, Captain Rodney McKay. He was broader, his arms thick with muscle, his face scarred from battles. Vorgul could only guess at his eyes, though, sharp and assessing, locked onto Vorgul's with an intensity that made the Vorthak commander's spine stiffen. Neither human raised a weapon. Gromnak shifted behind him, his breath shallow. The scientist had spent his life studying other species, but now, faced with them in the flesh, he looked as uncertain as a hatchling. Then the human female spoke. Your life support is failing. Not a question. A fact. Vorgul's mandibles twitched. He could lie. He could demand answers, threats, explanations. But what was the point? They were already in the human's grasp. So he told the truth. The human Coombs nodded. Then let's fix that. She turned, gesturing for them to follow. McKay fell into step beside her, his movements efficient, his gaze never leaving the Vorthak. Not with hostility, with assessment. The corridor led to a medical bay, its walls lined with equipment that hummed softly, its screens flickering with data streams in a script Vorgul couldn't read. A third human waited there, a medic, judging by the symbols on their sleeves. They didn't flinch at the sight of the aliens. Your suits are compromised, Coombs said. We can patch the leaks, but you'll need to remove them. Gromnak made a sound, a quiet, involuntary noise of distress. To shed one's armor was to bare one's throat. Vorgul hesitated. Then McKay did something unexpected. He reached up and unsealed his own helmet, pulling it free with a hiss of released pressure. His face was exposed now, his skin pale under the artificial light, his dark eyes steady. A gesture of trust. Vorgul's pulse hammered. But what choice did he have? Slowly, he reached for his own helmet seals. The moment the clasps released, the air hit him, cool, slightly dry, but breathable. The humans had matched their atmosphere to Vorthak tolerances, a small thing, a calculated thing. Gromnak followed suit, his movements jerky with nerves. The medic stepped forward, scanner in hand. Any injuries? Again, that blunt honesty. Vorgul exhaled. No, the medic nodded, then turned to Gromnak. The scientist flinched as the device passed over him, but the human didn't react. Just noted the readings and moved on. Coombs watched them all, her arms crossed. You're wondering why we helped you? Vorgul's spines flexed. Yes, she tilted her head just slightly. Because you were dying. As if it were that simple. As if mercy were not a weakness, but a choice. Gromnak made another sound, softer this time, almost a whisper. You could have left us. McKay's mouth twitched. Not a smile, something darker. We could have. The unspoken words hung between them, but we didn't. Vorgul's claws dug into his palms. This wasn't just about survival. It was about understanding. The humans had spared them not out of pity, not out of strategy, out of something far more dangerous. And as the medic finished their scans, as the hum of the ship's systems filled the silence, Vorgul realized the galaxy had underestimated humanity. Not because they were weak, but because they were something else entirely. The medical bay hummed with the low thrum of human machinery, softer than Vorthak technology, less jagged in its operation. The lights were dim, casting long shadows over the wounded alien mother and her child, their silver-purple scales dulled by exhaustion. The human medic had finished his scans, stepping back with a nod. Vorgul watched from the corner, his spines rigid. The scent of antiseptic and recycled air filled his nostrils, unfamiliar and unsettling. He had expected cold efficiency from these humans, perhaps even cruelty, given how they had torn through the scavengers who had ambushed his ship. Instead, they had brought his people aboard without hesitation, without demands. The question burned in his mind, hotter than the plasma scars still seared across his armor. Mercy was not a tactic he understood. In the Vorthak Dominion, survival was earned through strength, through the ruthless calculus of war. The weak were left behind, the wounded, if they could not fight, were culled. Yet here, in the belly of this human warship, the rules were different. Across the room, Major Coombs leaned against the bulkhead, arms crossed. She wasn't watching him. Not directly. Her gaze was fixed on the child, her expression unreadable. Vorgul had seen that look before, in the eyes of warriors who had lost too much. Gromnak shifted beside him, his voice a low rasp. Their systems. They are adaptive. Not just in design, in intent. Vorgul flicked a glance at the scientist. Explain. Gromnak's claws tapped against the datapad he had been given. A human device, sleek and utilitarian. Their medical tech doesn't just treat injuries, it learns. It adjusts to unfamiliar biology in real time. This level of adaptability, it's not just for their own species. He hesitated. They built this expecting to need it for others. A chill ran through Vorgul's veins. Humans did not merely prepare for war. They prepared for after. For the wounded, the lost, the ones who should have been left behind. A soft chime echoed through the bay. Coombs straightened, tapping the comb at her wrist. Go ahead. A voice crackled through McKay. Major, we've got a signal. Deep band transmission, encrypted. Origin point matches Vorthak military channels. Coombs didn't react, but Vorgul felt the shift in the air, the sudden coiled tension. Location, she asked. Dead space. No stellar bodies. Just a beacon. McKay paused. It's repeating. Same sequence, over and over. Gromnak's spines flared. That's... Vorgul cut him off with a snarl. He knew. The alpha signal. A distress call reserved for the Dominion's most critical failures. A summons for annihilation. Coombs turned to him, her eyes dark. You recognize it. It wasn't a question. Vorgul exhaled, his claws flexing. They think we're dead. Or worse, captured. His voice was gravel. That signal isn't a rescue, it's a purge protocol. The humans exchanged glances. McKay's voice came again, grim. If we intercept, we're walking into a trap. Coombs didn't hesitate. Set course, Vorgul stiffened. You would go toward a Vorthak kill fleet. For the first time, Coombs smiled. Not with cruelty, not with arrogance, with something far more terrifying. Someone out there thinks mercy is a weakness, she said softly. Let's remind them what happens when humanity chooses to fight. The ship's engines roared to life, and Vorgul understood, at last, the depth of his mistake. The galaxy had called humans prey, but prey did not hunt monsters. The void between stars was never truly empty. Vorgul had known this truth since his first combat deployment. Space was a graveyard of dead signals, of drifting wreckage, of the faint echoes of battles long past. But now, as the human vessel Resolute tore through the black at speeds that made his carapace ache, he saw something new. Not the clean, controlled plasma of Vorthak engines, nor the silver-purple pulse of Dominion weaponry. This was something raw, uncontained. The human ship's drive burned like a dying sun, its exhaust a searing blue, white scar across the darkness. The vessel itself was a blunt, brutal thing, armored in layers of ablative plating and studded with weapons that hummed with barely restrained fury. And yet, for all its violence, it moved with purpose. Toward the Alpha signal, Vorgul's claws dug into the command console as the tactical display flickered to life. The distress beacon pulsed ahead, its origin point a derelict Vorthak carrier, the Talon of Dominion, its once proud hull now a gutted wreck, its spine broken by some unseen force. Around it, the void shimmered with the telltale distortion of cloaked ships. A kill fleet, Gromnock hissed beside him, his spines flattening. They'll vaporize us the moment we drop stealth. Coombs didn't look at them. Her hands rested on the console, fingers splayed, as if she could feel the ship's pulse beneath them. "McKay," she said, her voice low. "Status." The human soldier's voice crackled over the comm. "Scans confirm at least 6 heavy cruisers in ambush formation. They're running silent. No active scans. They don't know we're here." A predator's advantage. Vorgul's mandibles twitched. "You cannot fight them. Not like this." Coombs exhaled, slow and deliberate. "We're not here to fight." Then movement. A flicker on the edge of the scanner's range. A life pod, small and fragile, tumbling from the wreckage of the carrier. Its signal was weak, its power fading. But the distress ping was unmistakable. A survivor. Gromnock's breath caught. That's, Vorgul knew. The pod's transponder code was civilian. A brood, carrier, a mother, possibly young. The Dominion did not leave survivors. The humans did. Coombs didn't hesitate. "McKay, get them." The Resolute banked hard, its engines flaring as it cut through the kill zone. The moment it broke stealth, the Vorthak fleet reacted, cloaks dropped, weapons charging, silver, purple energy lancing through the dark as targeting locks flared to life. The sky burned. Human point, defense cannons roared to life, not with the precise, calculated strikes of Dominion warfare, but with a storm of fire so dense, it turned space into a killing field. Railgun slugs shattered hull plating, plasma lances seared through shields, and then, as the first cruiser turned to engage, the Resolute fired its primary weapon. Vorgul had no name for what he saw. It was not a beam, not a projectile. It was a tear. A jagged line of distorted reality that ripped through the cruiser's spine and kept going, carving into the next ship and the next, until the entire formation buckled under the weight of its own destruction. Pod secured. McKay's voice was tight. 2 life signs. 1 adult, 1 child. Gromnock made a sound Vorgul had never heard from him before. Something broken. Coombs turned, finally to meet Vorgul's gaze. "Tell me," she said softly, "do your people still believe mercy is a weakness?" The wreckage of the kill fleet drifted behind them, burning, and Vorgul had no answer. The silence on the Resolute's bridge was absolute. Vorgul's claws flexed against the command console, the sharp tips leaving faint grooves in the alloy. His secondary heart thrummed too fast, too loud, a predator's pulse, betraying him. The Dominion kill fleet was gone, not merely defeated, erased. The human weapon had not just destroyed ships, it had unmade them, leaving behind only twisted wreckage and fading echoes of silver-purple energy. Gromnak stood rigid beside him, his cranial spines pressed flat against his skull. A Vorthak instinct, the posture of prey caught in open ground. His voice, when it came, was a rasp. They should have jettisoned it, standard protocol, a distraction. Vorgul said nothing. His gaze remained locked on the view screen, where the human boarding team maneuvered the escape pod into the Resolute's hangar bay. The pod was a Dominion design, its angular plating scorched, its energy signature flickering. Inside, 2 life signs, one fading. Humans did not jettison distractions. The medbay was too bright. Vorgul had seen human medical facilities before. Sterile, efficient, lit with a cold white glow that made his eyes ache. But this was different. The lights here were softer, warmer, as if the humans had tried to mimic sunlight. The Dominion female lay on the primary treatment slab, her carapace cracked, her breathing shallow. A human medic worked over her, gloved hands moving with a precision that bordered on reverence. Nearby, the child, small, fragile, its spines still soft, huddled in the arms of a human soldier. Captain McKay. Vorgul had seen this human fight, had watched him carve through Dominion shock troops with a blade in one hand and a plasma pistol in the other. Now he held the child as if it were made of glass. Gromnak made another sound, disbelief, disgust. They waste resources on the dying. Major Coombs stood at the foot of the slab, her arms crossed. She did not look at them. "No," she said simply, "we don't." The Dominion female stirred. Her mandibles clicked weakly, her compound eyes struggling to focus. When she saw the humans, her body tensed, instinctive terror. Then her gaze found the child. Something in her posture changed. McKay stepped forward, slowly, carefully. He knelt, placing the child beside her. The little one chirped, its tiny claws grasping at her damaged carapace. The female's breathing hitched. She looked at Coombs. Not with hatred, not with fear, with understanding. Gromnak recoiled. "This is a trick, a manipulation." Vorgul said nothing, because he had seen it too. The moment, the realization, the Dominion female knew she was dying, knew the humans had saved her child anyway. And in that instant, something fundamental shifted. Coombs exhaled. "We're not your enemy," she said, so softly it was almost a whisper. "We never were." The female's mandibles twitched. Then, with the last of her strength, she reached out and pressed her claw against Coombs' outstretched palm. A gesture of thanks, a gesture of surrender. Gromnak hissed. "This changes nothing." Vorgul turned away, because it changed everything. The Dominion female's claw trembled against Coombs' palm, a fragile bridge between species. The human commander didn't pull away. She held still, her breath shallow, as if fearing even the slightest movement might shatter the moment. The dying alien's carapace, once a gleaming silver, purple under the harsh lights of Vorthak warships, was now cracked and dull, leaking vital fluids in slow, rhythmic pulses. The child nestled against her, its tiny claws gripping her damaged plating, chirping in a language of clicks and whirs that needed no translation. Gromnak's spines flared in agitation, his violet ocular lenses narrowing to slits. "This is a deception," he hissed, though his voice lacked its usual conviction. The scientist had spent cycles dissecting human behavior, reducing them to data points, aggression thresholds, pain responses, combat efficiency. But this defied categorization. Vorgul remained silent, his massive frame, armored in the brutal utilitarian plating of a Dominion commander, was rigid. His mind, however, was a storm. He had seen warriors die countless times, honorable deaths, screaming deaths, deaths that meant nothing in the grand calculus of war. But this, a mother, broken and bleeding, using her final moments not to curse her killers, but to thank them. The female's mandibles parted, a weak, wet sound escaping her. Then her limb went slack, her claw slipping from Coom's palm. The child let out a high, keening wail, pressing itself against her still chest. McKay exhaled sharply, his grip tightening on his rifle. He didn't raise it. Gromnock stepped forward, his talons flexing. We should terminate the offspring. It is a liability. Coombs moved before anyone could react. She didn't draw her sidearm, didn't snarl a threat. She simply placed herself between the scientist and the child, her stance unyielding. No. A single word, a wall. Vorgul's gaze flickered between them. The human female was half his size, her body unarmored, her species soft and fragile by Dominion standards. And yet, she stood like a fortress. Gromnock bristled. You sentimental fools, this weakness will be your extinction. Coombs didn't blink. Maybe. But if it is, then well die knowing we were better than you. The words struck like a railgun slug. Vorgul felt something inside him fracture. The Dominion had always believed in strength, in the purity of conquest, the necessity of culling the weak. But this was something else. Not weakness, not even mercy. It was choice. The humans had every reason to slaughter the female and her child, every tactical advantage to erase them. And yet, they had chosen this. The child whimpered, its tiny claws scraping against its mother's lifeless carapace. McKay knelt again, his movements slow, deliberate. He didn't reach for the youngling, just waited. After a long moment, the child turned its large, glassy eyes toward him and crawled into his arms. Gromnock made a sound like a failing engine. This is madness. Vorgul finally spoke, his voice a deep, resonant growl. No, he stepped forward, his massive frame casting a shadow over the scene. This is a lesson, and for the first time in his long blood-stained existence, he listened. The command deck of the Iron Tide was silent. Not the disciplined quiet of warriors at attention, but the hollow stillness of a tomb. Vorgul stood before the main holodisplay, his massive claws flexing unconsciously as the image played for the third time. It was a simple transmission, unencrypted, unfiltered, a human soldier, McKay, cradling the Vorthak youngling in his arms, its tiny body curled against his chestplate like a hatchling seeking warmth. Behind them, the female's corpse lay draped in a thermal blanket, her wounds cleaned, her limbs arranged with a dignity no Dominion soldier would have granted even their own fallen. The human medic had done that, had chosen to. The broadcast had spread like radiation through the void. Every ship in the sector had seen it. Every crew, every warrior. Gromnock's voice was a rasp from the shadows. They weaponized mercy. Vorgul's mandibles twitched. The scientist was right, though not in the way he meant. This was no deception, no psychological ploy. The humans hadn't staged this moment, they had simply done it, then flung the truth of it into the stars like a challenge. And the galaxy was watching. On the display, the feed shifted. A human warship, the Indomitable, loomed into view, its brutal silhouette backlit by the dying light of a binary star. Its weapons were active, its shields humming at full strength. But it wasn't attacking, it was escorting. A single Dominion life pod, carrying the youngling and its mother's body, drifted toward the safety of Vorthak lines. The humans hadn't just spared them, they had delivered them home. Vorgul's secondary heart thudded painfully in his chest. He had seen empires fall, had shattered them himself, his claws slick with the blood of species deemed unworthy. But this was annihilation of an entirely different kind. The Dominion's strength was built on certainty, on the unshakable belief that mercy was weakness, that the strong must crush the weak, lest the universe itself unravel into chaos. And yet, here were the humans, standing unbroken in the wreckage of that logic. Gromnak hissed, his neural tendrils flickering with agitated energy. The matriarchs will demand retribution. They will call this an insult, a provocation. Vorgul turned his gaze to the stars beyond the viewport. Somewhere out there, the human fleet waited, not hiding, not retreating, just watching. And for the first time in centuries, the great Vorthak Warmaster felt something unfamiliar coil in his gut. The command deck of the Voidrend was silent, the usual hum of its silver-purple energy cores, muted as if the ship itself held its breath. Vorgul stood motionless before the tactical display, his claws flexing against the dark steel console. The holographic projection flickered with the last known coordinates of the human fleet, still holding position just beyond the edge of Dominion space. They weren't attacking, they weren't even moving. Gromnak's neural tendrils pulsed erratically, casting violet shadows across his armored face. "This is a trap," he muttered, his voice a low, grating vibration. "They want us to pursue, to overextend." Vorgul didn't answer. His secondary heart still thrummed with the aftershock of what he had witnessed, the human warships parting like a storm front to let the crippled Vorthak transport pass. No boarding, no final volley of plasma fire. Just release. It made no sense. A warrior did not spare an enemy unless they sought to humiliate them, unless they wished to demonstrate their superiority so utterly that the defeated would never dare raise a blade again. But the humans had done neither. They had simply let them go. A chime echoed through the deck. An incoming transmission. Vorgul's spines stiffened as the comm officer turned, his voice tight. "Warmaster, it's the human flagship." Gromnak hissed, his claws digging into the console. "They mock us," Vorgul exhaled, the air scraping through his throat like gravel. "Put it through." The holoscreen shimmered, resolving into the image of a human female, Major Rebecca Coombs. Her face was unreadable, her dark eyes steady. No triumph, no gloating, just waiting. For a long moment, neither spoke. "Your wounded have been treated," she said, her voice calm, measured. "They're being transferred to a neutral medical frigate, coordinates attached." Gromnak's tendrils flared. A trick. Coombs didn't react. She simply held Vorgul's gaze. "You have 1 hour to retrieve them." The transmission cut. Vorgul's claws flexed again, the alloy beneath them groaning under the pressure. This wasn't just mercy, it was precision. The humans had calculated every possible reaction, every possible move the Dominion might make, and they had dismantled each one before it could even form. They weren't just warriors, they were surgeons. Gromnak snarled, slamming a fist against the console. "We should burn their fleet to ash, show them what happens when they—" Enough. Vorgul's voice was a blade. He turned toward the viewport, where the distant stars glittered like shattered glass. Somewhere out there, the humans waited, watching, testing, and for the first time in his long blood-stained existence, Vorgul wondered if the Dominion had finally met something it could not break. Something that refused to play by the rules of the hunt. Something that fought like prey, but struck like a god. The silence on the Dominion's wrath was thick enough to choke on. Vorgul stood motionless before the viewport, his claws still embedded in the command console's alloy plating. The humans had not just humiliated them, they had engineered this moment. Every second of hesitation, every flicker of doubt in his warrior's eyes had been anticipated. Their mercy was not weakness. It was a scalpel, cutting deep into the Dominion's pride. Behind him, Gromnak seethed, his violet-ridged crest flaring in agitation. The scientist's claws twitched toward the weapon's console, his mind no doubt racing through retaliatory strikes, orbital bombardments, plasma lances, the kind of overwhelming firepower that had shattered entire civilizations. But Vorgul knew better. The humans had not come unprepared. Their fleet hung in the void like a pack of silent predators, their ships sleek and angular, their hulls coated in matte black composites that drank in sensor sweeps. No energy signatures, no reactor blooms, just silence. It was unnatural. No species should have been able to hide so completely. And yet, the humans did. Vorgul's mandibles flexed. He had seen the recordings from the outpost, how the human soldiers moved, how they fought, not with the brute force of the Dominion, but with a terrifying fluid precision. They had adapted mid-battle, shifting tactics before his warriors could even register the change. Prey did not do that. Prey did not hunt back. A chime from the comm station shattered the stillness. The human commander's voice cut through the tension, crisp and unyielding. "Time's up." Vorgul turned. The holodisplay flickered to life, revealing the human warship Resolute, its railgun batteries humming with restrained power, its missile pods primed. But it was the smaller vessel beside it that froze the blood in his veins. A medical frigate, its bay doors yawned open, revealing rows of stasis pods, each one containing a Dominion soldier, alive, unharmed. The humans had not just retrieved their own, they had taken prisoners, and now they were returning them. Gromnak let out a strangled hiss. "This is a trick they've implanted them with." "No," Vorgul's voice was gravel, "they don't need to. The humans had already won. This was not a battle of firepower, it was a war of perception. And with this single act, they had proven something far more dangerous than strength. They understood mercy, and that made them unpredictable." Vorgul exhaled, his gaze locked on the screen. Somewhere in the void, the human commander watched. The hunt had begun, and for the first time, the Dominion was not the hunter. It was the prey.